Welcome to The Explainer. Let's just dive right in because today we're looking at something that is fundamentally changing how we think about the creative process. We hear constantly about AI and writing, but there's a massive difference between what the flashy headlines claim and how real professional authors are actually using these tools behind the scenes. In today's Explainer, we're going to do a deep dive into exactly how an author used Claude AI, not to write a book for him, but to rescue a draft he had been totally stuck on for almost a decade.
But first, we really have to address the elephant in the room. When you hear the phrase, AI wrote a book, what's the very first thing that pops into your head? For most of us, it sparks this very specific, almost sci-fi assumption. Like, can an algorithm really just sit down, think up a brilliant idea, and write an entire book for you from scratch?
Well, yes and no. I mean, there is a popular approach out there, perfectly illustrated by a recent YouTube tutorial we reviewed. A creator showed how to use Claude AI to instantly generate a 10-page educational math workbook for kids aged 4 to 6. By just asking for a specific format, age range, and topic, Claude spit out the content in one click. Boom! Completely ready to be downloaded as a PDF and sold on Amazon's Kindle Direct publishing platform. It's incredibly fast, it's entirely automated, and, for a simple activity book, it works. But is that really what we mean when we talk about authoring a book?
We're going to pivot sharply away from that whole one-click generation myth today. Instead, let's focus on refinement. We're looking at the fascinating case study of author Kenny Kane. He used Claude not as some automated ghostwriter pumping out content, but as a sophisticated and iterative partner. He used it to diagnose structural issues and actually elevate his own human-led storytelling in a highly complex manuscript.
Section 1. The Stuck Writer's Dilemma.
To really get why this refinement process is such a game changer, we have to start with a very human, incredibly relatable problem. 8. That is the number of years Kenny Kane was completely, hopelessly stuck on his manuscript. He was trying to write this book called The Accidental Nonprofiteer, which was meant to help people who suddenly found themselves building organizations without any formal training. But for 8 long years, the project went absolutely nowhere. He wasn't just staring at a blank page, though. Actually, he had exactly 5,000 words. 5,000 words of unfinished potential just sitting there collecting dust in a Google Doc. This draft was filled with genuinely compelling stories, all drawn from a decade of his life helping build a highly successful organization called Stupid Cancer. The raw material? It was excellent, but the structure was entirely missing. Kane knew he had a problem. As he put it, what I had read like a collection of really good blog posts, not a coherent book. He was just overwhelmed. He couldn't figure out the narrative flow. He didn't even know for sure if he was writing a personal memoir or a how-to manual. He would literally open the document, move a few paragraphs around, feel completely lost, and just close it right back up.
Section 2. Claude as the diagnostician.
So after nearly a decade stuck in revision hell, Kane tried something totally radical. He fed his 5,000-word draft into Claude AI, treating it purely as a diagnostician. Now, the boundaries here are absolutely crucial. Claude diagnosed structural problems, it identified gaps in logic, suggested organizational frameworks, and caught tone inconsistencies. But what it did not do was write a single piece of original content. It didn't generate the stories or the frameworks, it didn't create the voice, and it definitely didn't make the final editorial decisions.
And this right here brilliantly illustrates a massive mindset shift. Kane realized, AI helped me become a better editor of my own work. Think about that. This wasn't a machine taking over his creative project. It was a 24/7 collaborative partner that just helped him step back and finally see his own writing clearly.
Section 3. The 4-phase editing process. So how did they actually pull this off? Here is the high-level roadmap of their process. Step 1 was the brutal diagnosis. Step 2 involved structural surgery. Step 3 focused on voice and flow, and Step 4 was the publishing push. Let's unpack exactly what happened in each of these, because honestly, this is a blueprint any writer could use.
All right, phase 1, the brutal diagnosis. Kane essentially uploaded his entire manuscript and just asked Claude, what is wrong with this? Because the AI could process all 5,000 words instantly, it spotted a fundamental structural flaw that Kane just couldn't see because he was way too close to the project. Claude pointed out that Kane was actually trying to write 2 completely different books at the exact same time, a memoir and a manual. He had to pick a direction. Once he had that direction, using personal stories to illustrate universal principles, they moved into phase 2, structural surgery. And wow, this is where Claude's pattern recognition truly shined.
For example, Claude pointed out that a story about volunteer management way back in Chapter 8 would be vastly more powerful if the reader first understood an email crisis that happened in Chapter 3. Claude was making these non-obvious, overarching narrative connections across the book that a human, reading linearly, might just easily miss.
Next up came Phase 3, Voice and Flow. Kane would write a new section, or rewrite an old one, and immediately feed it right back to Claude. The AI acted as this rapid-fire developmental editor. In seconds, it would catch exactly where Kane slipped into confusing nonprofit jargon, where his examples lacked context, or where transitions between paragraphs just felt too abrupt.
And finally, Phase 4, the publishing push. After the heavy lifting of the writing was actually done, the AI partnered with Kane all the way across the finish line. It seamlessly shifted roles, helping him with all that tedious Kindle formatting, writing SEO-optimized descriptions, and even generating marketing copies so he could finally get the book published on Amazon.
Section 4. Retaining your authentic voice.
Now, hearing all this might bring up the philosophical elephant in the room, right? Does using AI this heavily ruin a writer's authenticity? I mean, is the resulting book really yours if an algorithm helped you structure it? Well, Kane's stance is incredibly firm on this. AI doesn't replace human creativity. It amplifies it. Every single insight, every framework, and the deep soul of the book still came entirely from his 15 years of real-world experience. Claude merely provided the scaffolding so that his human experience could be presented clearly to the reader. If you want to try this methodology yourself, here is your toolkit. First, always start with diagnosis, not generation. Ask the AI what's wrong with what you've already done. Second, be highly specific. Don't just say, make this better. Ask, does this transition work? Third, iterate rapidly. The magic is in that back and forth conversation. Fourth, never forget you are the author. The voice has to be yours. And finally, lean into what AI is actually good at, pattern recognition and structure.
Ultimately, utilizing AI in this way, it isn't fundamentally different from using a traditional grammar checker, hiring a developmental editor, or leaning on a writing coach. The only real difference is that Claude is faster, cheaper, and quite literally available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The technology is serving the human's creativity, not the other way around.
Which leaves us with this final, kind of provocative thought directly inspired by Kane's journey. When you are staring down a project you've been stuck on for years, is it cheating to ask an algorithm for structural help? Or is it simply the smartest possible way to finally get out of your own way? Definitely something to think about the next time you find yourself staring at a blinking cursor. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.